Jacqueline Luna. I am the Adult Services Librarian here at the Coronado Public Library, and we are just thrilled to welcome Captain Alfred Scott McLaren with us today for this talk. And we're thrilled to partner with Bay Books today on this. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Karen Clausen of Bay Books, who will give a quick introduction and a bio for our speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacqueline. As Jacqueline said, thank you all for attending this evening. We're all looking forward to hearing what an impressive biography you have, an impressive career.
Anything to avoid yard work.
Well, I have just a snippet of his bio I wanted to go through, but I'm going to have to read it because there was no way I was going to get this to memory in the last couple of days. First of all, Captain McLaren has earned a PhD in physical geography of the polar regions from the University of Colorado Boulder, and he also has advanced degrees from Cambridge University as well as from George Washington University. His naval career started back at the U.S. Naval Academy, where he earned his commission in 1955. Captain McLaren was one of the first 50 naval officers selected by Admiral H.G. Rickover to attend the newly inaugurated nuclear power school in 1959. My husband is a SWO, and when he was reading this, he's like, yeah, this is some important stuff. So, very impressive. He impressed my husband. As a naval officer from 1955 to 1981, Captain McLaren completed multiple Arctic patrols and Cold War expeditions on nuclear-attack submarines, serving on numerous submarines. But the highlight of his service in uniform included his time as commanding officer of the USS Queenfish. Captain McLaren is President Emeritus of the world-famed 117-year-old Explorers Club, and he received the Explorers Club's Lowell Thomas Medal for Ocean Exploration, the Explorers Club's highest honor, for his extraordinary contributions to Arctic exploration and deep sea research. He is also President Emeritus of the American Polar Society. Captain was often called upon to speak, teach, and write about the role of the polar regions in the global climate change and on the development of deep sea submersible technology and efforts that further public understanding of science. His experience led to his significant contributions as a research professor and teacher, leading efforts to study Arctic ice systems and other projects for the Office of Naval Research, among others. In addition to emergency deep Cold War missions, he's also author of more than 50 papers and has published 2 additional books: Unknown Waters, a first-hand account of the historic under ice survey of the Siberian continental shelf by USS Queenfish, and also Silent and Unseen, on patrol in 3 Cold War attack submarines. He's qualified as a pilot on several submersible vessels and completed lengthy dives during 1999 to the RMS Titanic. That's so cool. He also participated in the first manned expedition to visit the wreckage of the German battleship Bismarck. As president of the American Polar Society, he recently initiated and organized major conferences on climate change at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
And scripts.
And scripts. Oh. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. We look forward to hearing. And we will have his book, Emergency Deep, on sale at the end if you guys want. He'd be more than happy to sign and check with you then as well.
Thank you, Karen. Now, where's my brother-in-law, Bill Manson? I've talked for Bay Books 2 previous times. He's slept through the first 2 presentations, so
that's why
I would appreciate give him a good elbow. This is going to be a little bit different talk, and I'm going to answer a question before it's even asked. Did I get this clear? No. It's been 50 years since I did what I'm going to tell you about, and I always followed Admiral Rickover's advice. If you have to ask the question, the answer is no. The other thing is, I did unofficially check it out with senior people, and they agreed with me that the people I'd be asking permission from either weren't born or were in kindergarten at the time I did these operations, And what would they say if I asked them? Well, they wouldn't even know what the hell I was talking about. And the next thing they'd say is probably, no, I don't think so. So this talk is going to be unique in one respect. I think I hold a record for Cold War submarine missions, at least 20 that were very successful, and I've probably been on over 30 of them. My whole career was on attack boats. And then what I'm going to be covering specifically in this talk is the 6 we did on Queenfish, which were pretty unique. And I'm going to lay this, and there you see the our ship's patch. And there's Queenfish. Now, what was unique from the very start is I was the commissioning exec of Queenfish, and she was the first of the sturgeon class to go to sea. We went, actually, the keel was laid almost a year and a half after the lead ship, but we were built by Newport News, and we went to sea finally 3 months before the lead ship Sturgeon, built by General Dynamics. So I was literally with this boat from the time she was a keel, and with her for 2 years. We took it to sea, tested it out in the Arctic just 6 weeks after being commissioned. And then I got off it when we got to Pearl Harbor, spent 2 years at the War College. And then uniquely, Admiral Rickover sent me back to take command of the same boat that I knew like the back of my hand. So that was absolutely wonderful. And you know about good boats and bad boats, good cars and bad cars. I'm also a pilot. You get lemons, and they always seem to be that from the very start. And Queenfish from the very start was a lucky boat. Well, the areas I'm going to be talking about during the time of my command is all our Cold War missions, with the exception of surveying the Siberian Shelf, either involved the international waters off the Kamchatka Peninsula on the principal base here, Petra Pavlos, or more dangerously, a couple of missions here in the Sea of Japan off Vladivostok. I didn't relish Vladivostok so much because as a young officer on Greenfish in the summer of '58, on Greenfish, it was the end of the day, battery was already low. We got caught by the Soviets and were depth charged for 7.5 hours. And being depth charged, I tell people, is a peak experience in your life. It's exactly right out of World War II. And there's nothing, talk about suspense. When they rev up, they're coming towards you, and they go overhead, and you just wait for that splash, splash, and then the charge going off. And by the time we got out of that, oxygen was down to about 13%. Battery, the percentage there was something over 10%. Everybody had headaches, but we managed to escape. In this '58, you didn't know what was going to happen to you. And in those days, we were always told, this was diesel boat before we left, if you get caught, nobody's going to acknowledge you. Don't expect to get rescued. And in those days, you know, heaven knows where you disappeared. So one thing that got thoroughly ingrained in me is it's stupid to make a life of submarines if you're going to run around getting detected. So from that time on, I was never on a boat that got detected, and certainly in command of Queenfish, we were never detected. And as many of you, I think, already realize, sometimes in certain areas, you're in as much danger from your own forces as you are from your potential adversaries. Well, there you see in the left side, the cog, or the kindly old gentleman, Admiral Rickover, basically worked for him for 22 years. He made infinitely good sense to me because he only wanted 3 things from you. Learn your job, do it, and then the thing we most had the trouble with is keep your mouth shut. And the younger you were, the greater your chances of getting in trouble with him. And then here from the local area, Dr. Waldo Lyon head of the Arctic Submarine Lab at Point Loma. He established that. He was responsible for the Arctic trips from the very start, the equipment we needed, the whole works. There you see Queenfish launch. And these are the basic characteristics. Slightly less than 300 feet, good sized beam, tonnage about the size of a light cruiser in World War II, one pressurized water reactor, and she didn't have to be refueled for, I don't know, 12, 15 years after commissioning. 15,000 shaft horsepower, one propeller, 17-foot diameter, single propeller. I want to emphasize that because I'm going to be coming back to that a couple of times. Naturally, I can't tell you what our top speed is, or I'd have to kill somebody right on the spot, starting with my brother-in-law. And 10 officers, 105 enlisted people. Well, you can imagine on the crew you carried, that varied depending on what you were doing. Sometimes be down to 95, sometimes 115, 120. There you see us alongside. Now, and here we're up in Daybot Bay loading special torpedoes for a mission. Now, on all these Cold War operations, I think one of the things I want to emphasize, every one of them, when you get right down to it, was extremely dangerous because we had 3 missions, either early warning, and we basically were going to what would be our patrol position in wartime, and then collecting intelligence. And that meant getting in close within weapons range, undetected, and gaining as much acoustic intelligence as you possibly could. Now, what am I talking about? The broadband noise from the target, individual tonals or frequencies from running equipment, and then something was used from the start in World War I, acoustic transients, the pops and cracks that you just can't get away from. The submarine changes depths in the hull, pops and cracks. Somebody moves the planes to make, and acoustic transients were absolutely invaluable. And then everything else you could pick up or photograph or learn about the crew and their method of operation. Although we always operated in international waters, you couldn't count on the Soviets to adhere to Geneva Convention, so you never took that for granted. And it's shocking to think about it now, but my rules of engagement were very, very simple. If I was on a Cold War mission collecting intelligence, and whoever I was collecting intelligence all of a sudden started flooding their tube or open an outer door, I was authorized to shoot with Snapshot. Simple as that. I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. That was 50 years ago. Maybe it's simpler and we're kinder now. I don't know. But that was what every mission was like. And so, needless to say, the emphasis of all the time remained undetected, undetected, undetected. And not just acoustically. This meant when you didn't send out any communications, you didn't waste time copying familygrams, that kind of stuff. There's a story there, ask me during the question period. And here you see Queenfish underwater. Now, that's a 17-foot diameter prop, but from the bottom of the keel to the top of the sail is 54 feet. But there were times, as you'll see in the Arctic trip, where the size of that rudder was sort of unhandy. And you'll see why. But on the other hand, I was engineer, navigator, and then chief engineer on Skipjack, world's fastest submarine for about 25 years. And Skipjack could literally turn with her own ship length. I mean, when you heeled into a turn, it was almost 50 degrees. Queenfish couldn't quite do that, but she was very maneuverable. And also from the very start, we made sure she was extremely quiet. So most of the time when I had command, she was probably between 20 and 30 decibels quieter than the surrounding sea state. And, you know, in the question and answer period, I can tell you just how we achieved that. They're change of command, and you'll see a big difference from this innocent kid about to take command to the way I looked by the time I left my command. This kind of life sort of ages you. And I'm relieving my former captain, Jack Richard there, who was my skipper when we were building Queenfish. And one of the things he said to me is, oh God, there's nothing worse than having an admin inspection and being relieved by your former exec. He was glad to get away. And I came to Queenfish with a lot of experience. I spent 2 years on Greenfish. We made 4 special ops on that, and one being one we got depth charge on. Then I was on Sea Dragon when we went from the Atlantic to the Pacific by the North Pole and played the first game of baseball there and all that. And made, 4 or 5 operations on her. Unfortunately, one of my skippers, the crew termed Captain Tuna, the chicken of the sea. We'd go on these operations for 2 months and never get closer than 12 or 14,000 yards to anything. Harry, you know what that was like. It just drive the crew nuts. Several Barents Sea spec ops on Skipjack. Then I was exec on Queenfish. And then I had 2 years at the War College, but rather than taking a summer vacation, I asked to go to sea during the summer. I went to sea for 4 months on Greenland. Originally, I was supposed to make a series of special ops on a Norwegian Cuban class submarine, and suddenly got shifted to Greenland. And Greenland was unique. Essentially, it was exactly like Queenfish, but she had that shorter sail. So I spent 4 months on her, and we spent 2.5, close to 3, with a Victor coming out of Murmansk, who was out searching all over for ballistic missile submarines, pinging away. And it was great refresher training for me because I was a command watch officer. So I actually did the trailing 8 hours out of 24 for over 2 months on Greenland. And on this Victor class, he never knew we were there. And that ended up being an NUC, or Naval Unit Commendation operation. So that was just 8 months before I took command. So I was ready to go. And the Queenfish had come back about 3 months before from a deployment. And both the exec and the chief of the boat, they thought we ought to ease down to Hawaiian-style operations. Well, you know, Hawaiian-style operations he envisioned as relaxed flying. And you know, there's no such thing as flying in a relaxed manner, operating a submarine in a relaxed, casual manner. Everybody interprets that different. So I started off a little tough with my crew. What they didn't realize is just months after I was going to take command, we'd be off on a Cold War mission. And then we had the survey of the Siberian Shelf, which nobody knew about. We were keeping secret till the last minute. But I had a unique crew. It was during the Vietnam era, and all the officers, including myself, had at least master's degrees in engineering, mathematics, or science. However, over half the crew had bachelor's degrees, and during that time, between 5 and 7 had master's degrees. And I had the unique leadership problem of having a Yale officer supervising a Harvard crew member who was infinitely smarter than he was. That definitely had to be split apart. But just this is a unique picture in that Petya Solomon, parent, graduate of the Juilliard School of Music, as was his wife. Whenever we were in port, they 2 of them played with the Honolulu Symphony. He played the cello with Mantovani for 5 years. Originally, he was born in Hungary. This guy here, very popular. I think he was heir to the Folgers coffee fortune. Got generous checks a couple of times a month. Very popular with the crew as far as going ashore. This guy here and this one later got their PhDs One was a senior professor at Oregon, the other at the University of Washington. And this man here, he doesn't look like it there, but he ended up being CEO of a major petroleum company. That's the kind of people we had then. A lot of wild horses. And here we're loading in preparation for the first operation. And of course, submarine living is wonderful, as you see. You're comfortably berthed here. This is where the crew sleeps. And of course, with a crew of 105 or 115, you have bunks for at least 85 or 90. And we have the nice custom called hot bunking in the torpedo room. Most of the time they're on top of the torpedoes, sometimes 6 abreast. And hot bunking means that as soon as somebody gets out of bed, somebody else gets into it. And sometimes you might have 3 people rotate through that. It's a great incentive to get qualified, get senior, and have somebody else take that over. And of course, on all Cold War operations, you took a full load of war shots. You loaded to capacity. And I already told you what the rules of engagement basically were. And so I took command in mid-September, off on the first spec op at the following year, about February. Harry, I don't remember were you in Pearl Harbor then or attended this brief, but nobody knew, I'd been in the Atlantic and nobody knew much about my background or just about what I was going to be doing. But here you see in the control room here, the maneuvering ship. We're heading for Petra Pavlos, and basically we're going to out here in international waters and try and collect as much intelligence as we possibly could, see what was there. And basically you arrived on station, you had your periscope up. We never had this much periscope up, and that's the attack periscope. You might have about that much. And you're looking to, you're sort of like a sea serpent there, just waiting for your prey to come to you, or you'd go to it. And of course, you always have an eye out for these ASW destroyers, because they can ruin your whole day if they detect you. I mentioned the Snapshot. My routine, we trained and trained and trained on this. And throughout any mission I was on, I always had one ready to go, the tube ready to go, to launch it within 20 to 30 seconds max. There was another area, which I've already mentioned, I won't mention it again, where generally I felt better having 2 tubes ready. The main thing is I didn't have to ask anybody's permission, and I certainly wasn't going to scratch my head as to whether I was in danger or not if I heard somebody flooding a tube or opening an outer door. That's not the time to do any thinking. One of these submarines was quite active in those areas at that time was this Foxtrot diesel. Now, many of you remember, and we certainly encountered them during the Cuban Missile Crisis. At least 4 of those went down off Cuba carrying one single nuclear torpedo. I think many of you know the story where one skipper got caught by our forces and got extremely agitated and wanted to fire his nuclear torpedo at these surface ships. And thank God he was stopped by one of the 3 officers on board. I always wondered what happened to his career afterward, but it prevented a god-awful exchange happening. But these were always very quiet. They were noisy when they're on the surface snorkeling, but once they got submerged, they were a real threat to you. And we were looking for the November class, the first of the attack boats. Now, I never ever saw one in the Pacific. And now I have a good idea why. Later in 1997, when I was president of the Explorers Club, I had a special event at the Explorers Club where we had a fantastic dinner. I invited the first 4 U.S. skippers, Anderson through John Nicholson, who had been up to the Arctic, plus Dr. Walter Lyon. And I tried to track down the 2 November class Russian skippers who had been to the North Pole and 1992-93. Well, by 1997, they and most of their crew either had died from or were very sick still from radiation poisoning, because they built these fast and for speed, but they didn't use adequate shielding. So that's probably why we never saw any operating in the Pacific period. But then here you see the Echo class cruise missile submarine. We saw more than a few of these. It was interesting to see them raise. There's 4 launchers here. They had to launch the missiles from the surface, but to raise these up, it's quite a spectacular sight. I mean, they're classy looking boats, but like the rest of this class, they're pretty noisy. And needless to say, all these, we collected absolutely all the intelligence we could acoustically. Then one of their first ballistic missile submarines, nuclear, is the Hotel class, and in this are 3 vertical tubes. I call them operating off Petra Pavlos, but to my knowledge, nobody ever caught one going out in patrol. I have no idea what they were doing with that. Now we come to the Gulf class, a diesel boat. Again, 3 ballistic missiles here. And what I prepared to do on this, because I was taught how to do this on a diesel boat, we did the first underwater hull surveillance on a Soviet ballistic missile submarine ever done. And the conditions were ideal. It was heading south. The seas were less than 2 sea state. Ideal situation, great lighting. And so we slipped underneath, and I spent about an hour just filming and taking pictures of them fore and aft. And of course, you know, you've got to go zigzagging back and forth. You can't go at the same speed as a guy. I think Harry remembers I had one of my classmates tried it at the same speed and slammed up underneath the guy and broke off 2 periscopes. An unhandy thing to do. But we collected, just learned everything you could possibly do about the underside. Well, needless to say, when I got back in port, people were really excited about that. And particularly Admiral Ricko, the first time I ever saw him smile. Okay, and then we stayed with him. He continued down the Kuril Islands, and we caught the same Gulf firing a ballistic missile, able to film all that, the whole sequence. But this guy was pretty unprofessional the whole time. He never looked astern. He just bagged it down there and bagged it back. He didn't care if anybody was behind him or not. Had not the vaguest idea that we were with him the whole time. Well, when we got back, and this was just a port-to-port mission. I think I spent one night at home. They had me off to Washington, briefing everybody from the CIA and the vice president right on down. I got some of the dumbest questions ever from the CIA. And we'll get into the subject of dumb questions during the question and answer period. I'm always looking for an even dumber question than what I've heard before. Okay, then just a couple of months went by, and we did an operation which I had proposed when I was an instructor at the Naval War College to do the last big survey in the Arctic Ocean that had not been done, and that is to survey the entire Siberian continental shelf. Under ice, that is the Laptev, East Siberian, and Chukdev seas, and basically about 3,400 nautical miles of seas. My first book, Unknown Waters, is on that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than say we came up here in July of '70, and I'd also proposed retracing Nautilus route exactly, coming up, measuring the ice, fixing our position, exactly where she did 12 years earlier, and this was for global warming purposes. Okay, when we got back to port, the modern digital computer hadn't been invented yet, so I ended up doing digitizing this and analyzing this for my PhD at the University of Colorado Boulder from 1983 to 86. Then we did the first survey of a section of the extension of Mid-Atlantic Ridge called the Gackel Ridge. And this is the slowest seafloor spreading area in the world. but looking for tectonic activity, and we found it. Then down for the going into these completely unknown waters, and basically I was charged with going in as deep as I can, as far as I could, to about the 20 fathom curve, and basically charting a navigable route, also an interdiction way of getting to intercept the northern sea route, this entire Siberian shelf. Well, this was a god-awful trip, and actually, we didn't know how long it would take. We loaded out for 180 days, and was basically instructed to come back when we were finished. In some cases, it went a little faster or slower, and we'll get into this, but I still have bad dreams about this East Siberian Sea. The average depth of this 1,000-mile sea is about 137 feet, and you got ice going to the bottom. I'm also an instrument-rated pilot with many hours, and I would say much of this trip, particularly in the East Siberian Sea, is like flying in the upper part of a subterranean cavern on instruments. You're constantly maneuvering. It's very intense, and about the most anybody can take is about 2 hours, and you have to relieve the people that are on watch. And this became standard. Running, clearing the bottom 20 feet, trying to clear the ice overhead by at least 30 feet. Sometimes it'd squeeze in as much as 6 to 8 feet from the bottom, and clearing the ice, the closest I ever came was about 10 to 12 feet. And on the way to the North Pole, I was assured by all the authorities, don't worry about encountering icebergs. Nobody's ever encountered an iceberg en route to the North Pole. Well, we're running at 500 feet when we encountered this, and emergency deep beneath it. And then when I was digitizing our records during my PhD, found we just slipped beneath it by 17 feet. And if you run into an iceberg in the Arctic Ocean, that ruins your whole day, and probably your submarine's going to be in a whole lot of different pieces. And then to the North Pole. I want to backtrack. I don't have a picture, but let me attest. We did encounter Santa Claus there. He exists. So if there's any doubters, I do have the pictures to prove it. I'll backtrack a minute and say on Sea Dragon in 1960, we got as close to the North Pole as we could within 500 meters, and decided to play the first game of baseball played at the North Pole. We lined up the bases such, the pitcher's mound is our best estimate of the North Pole. This was 1960. If you hit a home run, you circumnavigated the globe. If you hit the ball into right field, it's across the international date line into tomorrow. And if you threw it, the right fielder caught it, he'd throw it back into yesterday. And those of you who played baseball, you know, sliding took on new meaning. You might hit second base and slide 20 or 30 feet beyond that. And the baseball now is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. But with all this going back and forth, we never figured out exactly what day we ended this game on. But we didn't do this on Queenfish. And then I say the very malevolent East Siberian Sea. It was 1,000 miles. Now, none of this had ever been charted by anybody before. And in many cases, you had the ice going right down to the bottom. So you're going through these caverns. And sometimes you'd find these big scours. Well, you think, God, this is great. You could get down in here and go under the ice. Well, sometimes they'd have big slabs of God knows what coming up 30 feet above the bottom. So it was extremely hazardous. It also was an irregular bottom. So you all the time, I mean, it was intense the whole time. And the inevitable happened. We're about 2/3 across the East Siberian Sea, and we made the mistake of doubling back on ourselves, and all of a sudden, we're in what I call the ice garage. The ice is right to the bottom in front of us. Within 2 ship lengths either side, the ice is to the bottom. We're 6 feet above the bottom and hovering, and about 10, the ice is above us about 10 feet. And of course, these things always happen in the evening when you're having fun. We're watching Jack Palance just get finished off in this wonderful movie by Ellen Ladd. And the master in the watch comes down and literally grabs me by the shoulders and says, "Come to the control room." Well, I go up there and I can see what the situation is. And the first thing I did is picked up the MC system and I said, "Don't anybody move." We trimmed up now. I mentioned the 17-foot propeller. Well, the only thing to do was to back out the same way we came in. Those of you that have operated single screw vessels know that they have a nasty habit when you back. They squat and they back to port. Well, that wasn't an option in this case. So what they had to do is keep everybody calm, trimmed up. We didn't want to catch the ice at the bottom. Had the throttleman get on the sound-powered phones with me, and then I just had him spin the prop astern 2 or 3 revolutions. We'd trim up. And it seemed like an eternity to get out of this situation, but actually I think it took about an hour and a half. After that, if it seemed deeper water was backtracking, we just continued south until it came our way. We're never going to get into this again. My wife tells me I still have dreams on this. I will say, though, this is the second worst experience I've ever had in my life. You'll soon see the worst experience. And, okay, we went back to port, a very successful trip, and then less than a year later, we're back again off Petra Pavlos. Now, this was a unique operation. Nothing was given to me on paper, but I was told, and it's something like out of the Hunt for Red October, that the Soviet Union's top skipper, who taught PCOs, would be taking an especially quieted Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine from Murmansk to Petra Pavlos by the Arctic Ocean. And I was to try and intercept it, but I was only told this verbally. I have long since forgotten the guy's name, but who could remember it anyway? And I missed him coming out of the Barents Sea going to Petra Pavlos. But we had a hunch, a good hunch, that he was going to be taking it out on patrol. Here you see the Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine, much like our first ballistic missile submarine, the George Washington class, with 16 missiles here. And I don't think this guy looked as good as Sean Connery, but he was pretty damn good. And he had a hell of a reputation. And this is who I was supposed to catch, and this is a side view of the way this thing, it was especially quieted, and this doesn't show some of the streamlining features that you see now on our newest class, the Virginia-class submarine, sail fairings and things like that. They're a very, very quiet boat, unusual. And so we know there's a couple of them in port, but we're waiting for this prize. Don't know if he'd come out or not. And then one night, he heads out. I'm on the periscope, and unfortunately there's dense fog. And the only way we're detecting his acoustic characteristics and his radar. And I don't know, I had that sixth sense that it was time to go down to about 120, 200, 300 feet. Damn good thing I did, because all of a sudden he damn near submerged on top of us. Got back in his tail, then I sort of searched around to make sure that nobody was following him, and then we took him in trail, and he headed straight up for the Bering Sea. And all I could think of is, geez, we gotta go to the Arctic again? And he got way up here, and obviously he knew something about our underwater surveillance of the SOSA system. He got way up here, and then he just headed due south. And all this time, the SOSA system is getting hits on me, and they're wondering where I'm going, but they don't have any detection on him at all. Nothing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He went down to the Aleutians, and he progressively got quieter and quieter and quieter as he headed down through the Aleutians. And here's the situation. We're back here. There he is. And it wasn't until he approached the Aleutians and got through that then he started to clear baffles and make long searches astern. And then just sort of drop back, go back deeper, and just keep minimum aspect towards him so that we presented hardly any cross-section where he could pick us up. And the whole thing lasted close to 10 days. And needless to say, I slept something like about 45 minutes a day. I stayed right there around the periscopes, caught cat naps, but there was no way in hell once we took him in trail and wanted to let him go. I also didn't dare tell anybody that we were in trail because they didn't want any electronic emission from us detected by either them or our forces. So it wasn't until we got down south through the Aleutians I was able to come up and quickly say, in trail, and that's it. Then he kept going down. He got progressively closed, quieter and quieter and quieter. And he was virtually undetectable. And he was pretty much, as he got closer to his patrol position, he was up periscope depth a lot. And I reached the point for the last 2 days I was literally beneath him. And the only thing we were holding him on was the acoustic transients, the pops and cracks. But even funnier, this supremely quiet boat. Every time the crew changed watch, about every 6 hours, slam doors, they're singing, dropping tools, just gave the whole thing away, and we'd give a sigh of relief. We still got it, but it was just crazy. Needless to say, we recorded all this, and boy, if there was a great object lesson for my crew as to why you need to keep quiet. And sometimes somebody would put some kind of tool down, and you'd have a sound short from a rotating piece of machinery to the hull. It was really crazy. Every 6 to 8 hours, they'd completely blow it. And then finally, we're totally exhausted. They're here about 800 to 1,000 miles north of Hawaiian Island. We got the good news to head home. And as you can imagine, I barely got one night's sleep when they had me off to Washington and briefing everybody. I'll never forget, I also briefed the Secretary of the Navy, John Warner, who had just married Elizabeth Taylor about 2 weeks before. And he explained to me, he just sort of blurted out his predicament. He said, you know, I'm her seventh husband. I don't know what I can bring to the table. And I smiled sympathetically, though. I think at that age, maybe some of us would have liked to have been in his shoes. That dilemma. Okay, then back to Petra Pavlos. We were they had deployed for Westpac, but they brought me back all the way back to Hawaii. And then we departed again. My last brief in Pearl Harbor, the force medical officer told the Admiral, he said, you know, Commander McLaren is suffering from extreme fatigue. Well, the Admiral at that time was a World War II vet, and he just smiled, slapped me on the back, and said, well, that's all right, Fred can sleep on the outbound passage. That's the kind of sympathy you got for lack of sleep in those days. And we're back to Petro again. And this time, there's another ballistic missile, Yankee's about to do something, and we catch him going out. He heads down the Kurils, and we catch him doing a dual missile shot. One and then the other, and again, we completely recorded that. Then finally went into Yakuza, relaxed, and then the mission I dreaded was to get in here into the Sea of Japan off Vladivostok. Somebody can kill that phone, please. And this is the worst experience I ever have had in my life. I've been to Vladivostok maybe about 4 previous times on other boats, and I knew just where I wanted to go. Unfortunately, it was a dense acoustic layer, and we went under this acoustic layer, came to periscope depth. We were in the sound channel, And I just made a quick sweep around the periscope, and sonar all excitedly said, 2 torpedoes in the water, straight for us. Well, sure enough, there were 2 steam torpedoes coming straight for us. Now, if they'd been war shots, one action might be to blow to the surface and hope they ran beneath you. Well, based on what I'd seen, that was not an option. And the next thing, I remember just sort of glancing and seeing these white faces in the control room. I had to generate some bearing drift quickly because it was 0. They were dead on. I didn't want to present any too much aspect to whoever fired the torpedo, so it just a little bit to port, generated enough where both of them went streaming down our starboard side. The nearest one was about probably, I don't know, anywhere from 5 to 10 meters away, with the other one in equal space. And then we got the hell out of there. Well, about 24 hours later, we found out we had just inadvertently stumbled into the middle of an exercise where a Romeo was frying the torpedoes at an ASW vessel, and we just happened to get in the middle of it. Well, now, there were practice torpedoes, but would that be dangerous? Yeah. The heads on a practice torpedo are about 600 pounds plaster. Just imagine if one of those had hit our propeller, a rudder, anything. It would have been a miserable situation. So finally we returned to Yakuza again. I'm up there bringing it in. We're all pretty tired now. And then I get a winter deployment, short one, over Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. And amazingly, I guess this Goff was being punished because he was sent out the second week in January to fire a missile. But this was off of Vladivostok, and he went north, and we caught that shot as well. Then, on my last deployment, it was the first, I think, there might have been a couple other submarine combat deployments, but I was told that on this mission, which would be about anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks, I was authorized to attack and sink any North Vietnamese supply trawlers. However, they draw very little water, so I had to track down, I finally got about 6 World War II Mark 14-5 torpedoes, where you could set them to run about 2 feet beneath the surface. And finally, on the 10th day, the big moment came. This one was coming down the coast. And those of you who operate in this water knows the depth is about 75 to 90 feet, and you got a 54 feet from the keel to the top of the sail. You're pretty tight, but at least the survey experience had gotten us comfortable with shallow water. So this guy comes down, he's loaded with boxes. We set up on him, and I just see these 4 wizened old seamen on deck. There's probably somebody piloting. I look and look and look at this, and I thought, I'm not gonna have this on my conscience. This is not a worthy adversary. I'm not gonna blow him to kingdom come. And so we stood down, and because all I had to do is just report and have a surface ship check him out. There's no reason I needed to attack him, waste a torpedo, and kill these people in the first place. It made no sense. About, half of my crew was pretty excited. Boy, shoot him, shoot him. A third of my officers the same way. And I think many thought, well, you get back to port, you were specifically instructed to do this, you're going to get court-martialed. Well, fortunately, the Admiral just smiled and slapped me on the back and said, I would have made the same decision. But I would have never backed down. It would have been a dumb thing to do. Yeah. Here we see it coming back for the very last time. I'm way the hell up there. Queenfish was a wonderful handling boat. In the entire 4 years I had command, I only used tugs 4 times when they were mandated. I mean, what's the point in being skipper of a ship or a submarine if you're not going to do your own ship handling? And handling a single screw vessel was a lot of fun once you developed the knack. And she was a wonderful handling boat. Then one point I got one of those few about I think 4 or 5 of us got the DSM, which entitles me to be buried at Arlington Cemetery with all the. Originally, I told my wife, go for the whole thing, the whole company, Marines, the band, the whole works. But I've given up that idea. Also, I've also given the idea up of being buried at sea. And I'm going to digress a minute. I've made 2 dives on Titanic, and I was on the team to make the first manned dives to 16,000 feet to the German battleship Bismarck. If you've ever been that deep and seen these wicked-looking things down there, hagfish and black vipers and some of the meanest-looking things, and it occurred to me on my first dive on Titanic, geez, what if you're not really dead? There you are in the shroud without a cell phone. Do I want to be finished off by these things? I immediately got back and changed my will. Bury me on land. None of this being buried at sea business.
Who was the admiral there?
Oh, I think there was, this is Chick Clary. Yeah, he was Sink Pack Fleet, rather. So he was a World War II ace, and he was great. So he also recommended us for the PUC, and I won't mention the Rear Admiral's name, who back in Oppo 2, who had it downgraded to an NUC. And you know, I feel very strongly about these unit commendations. They should be given to the team first, give the awards afterward. But it's, you know, for a whole lot of reasons. The most important thing is to acknowledge and recognize your team that made this all possible. And I still burn over that being downgraded. Then I finally got relieved of command, pretty emotional. One funny thing, I was one of those, as Harry remembers, I wore a beard the whole time during the Zumwalt era. A lot of pressure to get that beard off. And we went into Guam on our way back, and a division commander, not my division commander, somebody else's, flew all the way out to Guam to say to me privately, you know, Fred, it would be better if you came back without your beard. Well, that made me so angry that I immediately had my change of command pictures taken with my beard and sent. They got to Pearl before he got back. And I left the command with a beard, and I kept the beard for another month. And then I was going to go to the Submarine Development Group in New London, where I'd be essentially a division commander. And I knew they're very conservative in the Atlantic. I knew they were really concerned about this dude coming back with a beard. I ruined their whole day. The day I reported him, I shaved it off. And that whole day, first day at the development group, nobody could think of anything to say to me because they were all primed to tell me how to take off my beard. That's the last slide, and that's the end of my talk. Subject to any questions you might have. And I think, as you can tell, I had a hell of a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I have to be honest, though, and say, after it was all over, I probably went through about almost 4 years of PTSD. Although I don't know what we called it in those days, but you didn't know exactly what was the matter with you, but you had this souped-up life. And then I'm back on this calm East Coast where you're not even allowed to dive a submarine until you reach 600 feet. And it was crazy. And it took me a long time. It was hard on my family. And what I did, only those that know me very well knew that throughout most of my military career, I competed in martial arts. And so on this 4 years at the Dev Group, I was spent to work this off anywhere from 20 to 25 hours a week. I trained in and competed in full contact Kung Fu. And I did that up till the age of about 44. Then I got tired of a lot of cracked ribs with all these energetic young kids that you had to wait till they make their fatal mistake. But at least it sort of worked that off. But it's very real. When you go through something like that, you really don't know what the ultimate effect is going to be on you. But it's certainly tough on your family. So, now I said there's no such thing as a stupid question. But let me give you 2 examples to inspire you. I was I've done my doctorate and 2 masters, and it's all about global climate change, particularly the Arctic. And I gave a talk in Washington, D.C., and I had a really sinister young man standing right over there, long hair down almost to his waist. And he really looked wicked. And finally, I finished the talk, and he walks up and loudly says, "You know a lot about ice, don't you?" And nodded modestly. There was about several hundred in the audience. And then I wondered what's going to come next. And he said, "What do you think about using icebergs to plug all the dangerous volcanoes in the world?" Oh, God, what do you say to that? And I started to explain that there were some engineering problems. He got mad, stamped his foot, and he said, "Well, where the hell do you stand on volcanoes?" And I didn't have the presence of mind to say, "As far away as possible, young man." But then I thought that's the best question I ever heard. But between 96 and 2015, I've lectured on about 62 cruise ships, most of it in the Arctic. And we're off East Greenland. And I heard the best one ever. We're in a Zodiac. And this person says, "How far are we above sea level?" So I'm always looking for a better question. So please give me one. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How many subs did the Soviet Navy have at that time?
Oh, God, I'd have to say anywhere, probably close to 200.
Subs.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis, just that the Foxtrot and the Whiskey, they had over 60 of those. Yeah. They had a lot. That didn't necessarily mean you saw them at sea, but they had a lot of submarines. A lot of submarines. Yes.
Sounds like you had a pretty good relationship with them, Rickover. Any good stories on your interview with them? And
Yeah. I'd been a boxer, Golden Gloves boxer and all that, and when I was thinner, my ears stuck out. So I go into the Admiral's office, and it was really something. This wizened little man back behind the desk, but his eyes are just blazing away. They're right there. And the first thing he says to me, he says, "What are you, a wrestler?" And I said, "Sir?" He says, "Yeah, you have cauliflower ears." Oh boy. Well, I was sensitive about the way my ears stood out when I was thinner and younger. Those were fighting words. It was a perfect thing to say to me. And then he immediately says, "Well, my people have talked and looked at you. You're stupid and lazy and we can't use you." Well, but he got my adrenaline up, and I stood there for about 5 minutes. And to this day, I can't remember whether I told him I wasn't stupid or I wasn't lazy. And meanwhile, his secretary is trying to get me out of there, and I keep talking. And then I come out of his office, and his number 2, Captain Dunford, says, "Come in here, Mac." Now, when I'd been interviewed by him, I was Lieutenant McLaren. I wouldn't "Come in here, Mac." He'd been listening in, and he said, "Well, that was quite a performance." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "The only thing I can tell you is out of the 7 interviews in Pearl Harbor, you stood at the top or the very bottom." Well, I got back to the Ambassador Hotel, and people had been interviewed before me were whooping it up in the bar, and I got a call I'd been accepted. But I mentioned before, I never really had much trouble. Now, when I was a PCO, there'd always be about 6 of us that spend about 3.5 months with him learning every single detail about the engineering plan of the submarine. And every Saturday, you had a delightful 4 to 5 hour session with him. I found out right away the best thing to do is sit to his immediate right, because he always asks that person to his right the first question. Well, the best thing was to get the first shot. The worst thing is to be the last guy to get the shot at that question. Well, my favorite question was, and he gave us an opportunity to ask the question. So I asked him, "Why are we naming submarines after people?" And his answer was, "Because fish don't vote." No, he was a very interesting man, but the best thing I think most of us got from him was the fact that he really pushed you beyond your own limits you set on yourself. I mean, and I never had any trouble the whole time with it when I was skipper. Never heard from him. Didn't call me or chew me out. Did fail an Operation Reactor Safeguard at the time. He had Admiral John Nicholson do a full investigation, but all he could come away with after several days of Queenfish is we had the highest morale of any crew, and we did have the highest re-enlistment rate for 4 years. We did get the first Golden Anchor Award, and most of my crew stayed with me the whole time. Long-winded answer to your question, but everybody has a different story. I have to tell you one more story. I told you it was during the Vietnam era, and he was interviewing some really educated people, and he was interviewing a guy that had his doctorate from Georgetown with all these credentials in religion, but his basic field was motivating people. And when you're in there as a PCO, you've got to make notes and completely record this interview. And then when you finish, of course, they collect the paper and all the indentations so you can't carry away anything you're going to use in the boat. Anyway, he's talking with this guy, and then he says, all of a sudden, I hear the Admiral say, we're having a lot of trouble with this PCO. And I look up, and all of a sudden they're both looking at me. And he says, I want you to motivate him. Well, this idiot looks at me and makes the mistake of asking, what's the matter? But when I finish with long hours, lack of recognition, family separation, low pay, man, I hit him with about 7 or 8 of those. And all this guy could look at me, and he started to open his mouth and shut it. He didn't know what the hell to say because I hit him several times with a 2x4. And the Admiral got mad and said, motivate him. You've done something, say something to him. This guy just froze. Then about 2 hours later, I passed the Admiral in the hall, and he sort of smiled at me. But I was really cornered there, and I knew I had to hit him hard. So that's the end of that. Another question? Yes?
You ever meet Tom Clancy and give him some clues how to write his book?
I did meet Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy supposedly during the Hunt for Red October talked to a lot of my crew members. But anyway, in 2001, Clancy wanted to meet with me. He knew something about what I'd done, and obviously this talk has not covered a lot of what we've done. And he wanted to write a book with me. Well, I spent 45 minutes talking with Tom Clancy. How many of you have read Stephen King? Well, Clancy is about like talking with Stephen King. And man, there's no way in hell that anybody could write a book with Clancy. He was an interesting character and certainly smart and wrote a great book, Hunt for Red October. But you would just be eaten up or go crazy trying to work with him.
Your classmate, Scott Macaulay, did. Scott Macaulay worked with him.
God bless him. I hope he's still sane.
He's dead.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
How do you do the underwater navigation without doing some type of sonar, or because that would give you away?
Well, we had at that time, first of all, you have the inertial navigation system.
Okay.
Okay. Then the other thing is the oldest thing in the world, hand-dead reckoning. If you really know the characteristics of your submarine, there's bottom contour navigation, but on Queenfish we had a very high narrow beam sonar. Let's say it's something above 200 kilohertz, maybe about a degree and a half, undetectable.
Okay.
And you'd use that.
Same thing for the isopods.
Yeah.
Why do you think the greenfish? Do you know why the greenfish was detected when you were first?
Oh yeah, I've always liked Rimsky-Korsakov and Scheherazade since because we're patrolling off Rimsky-Korsakov Island, and somebody sees a fishing boat, and they're a ways away, and we don't think anything about it. But the fishermen detected us, called us in to Vladivostok. And at that time, my skipper was Al Davis. You might have remember him, Tiger Davis. and a very aggressive skipper. And he says, oh, good, when all these anti-submarine warfare vessels are coming out of Vladivostok, we're going to be watching a major exercise. Well, what we didn't realize is we were the exercise. So we got detected and just got away by the skin of our teeth. What we had to do finally is get up into the layer and go directly at one of these two destroyers that were staying back on our tail and vectoring these patrol craft to drop the depth charges. And we got away and we went north and out of Lappu Strait.
Were you in international waters? Were you in Soviet?
No, international waters always. What kind of answer do you expect from me?
Okay.
Bill?
This will probably win the prize, I think. Now,
Good. So stand up and say it loud so everybody can hear this great question, okay?
but so the those shots of like Soviet submarines and so forth that they're for firing the missiles and so forth. How did you get them? Was that
These are collected by aircraft intelligence. Obviously, the shots I took were from a different aspect. You would have seen the crosshairs. Nobody let me keep any of those.
So, but I mean, you didn't sort of call in and sort of say there's a good shot ring in an aircraft.
Right, yeah. That would have been the day. Harry, you got a question?
That's what I was going to ask Fred. Those are wonderful pictures of the submarines. But do you have any pictures that you took?
No.
Okay, that's enough.
Not at all. And but I was able to get on my survey of the Siberian Shelf, knowing that photo report would disappear into the bowels of submarine. I kept the entire photo report of the survey of the Siberian Shelf and told them I was keeping it. And nobody argued with me. Eventually turned it over to the Arctic Submarine Lab.
So why was Yankee Station just east of Commande? Was it because it was visiting?
Well, because they had aircraft carriers there and they were bombing. They were in support of our forces battling the North Vietnamese, and some of them were flying intruders into North Vietnam and doing all kinds of things. But that was a very dangerous place for us. Imagine if any of them had detected a submarine of any nation nearby. So that was very hazardous for us operating in that area. We'd been detected by anybody. There'd be some idiot anxious to make a name for themselves and go bomb that submarine they just detected. Did that happen in World War II? You bet your life it did. It can happen anytime. Yes?
When you encountered that North Vietnamese trawler in the South China Sea, wasn't that after the peace accords were signed?
No.
It wasn't?
No. Before.
What was before?
Yeah.
74. 73?
Yeah, let's see, this was late 72. Okay, so anything still went.
And also, why did they name one of the Soviet classes Yankee?
That's just a NATO name. Rather than call it Project Umpty-Ump or whatever Russian name they gave it that nobody could remember, we just named these things willy-nilly. Yankee, Hotel, Echo, Charlie, Victor. I don't think we gave any female names to anything. The female being the most dangerous of the species. Anything else? What did we do ashore? Well, Harry would attest we raised hell ashore. Got a lot of winding down to do. Well, so please don't anybody leave without buying a book and having me sign it, or I'll think ill of you.
Thank you so much.